Today is really not a nice day for gardening, so come on, let's go into the greenhouse and I'm going to answer your questions. Hey everyone, how's it going? And welcome back. Today is the perfect day for a bit of a chat, a bit of a catch up and a Q&A answering the questions that you have asked me. And that's because although it looks like a really nice day outside, and even though it's the middle of March, it's actually freezing cold. It's really cold, it's really windy, there are really heavy, not just rain showers, but hail showers. And I don't particularly want to be standing out in the garden. So I'm gonna answer your questions that you've sent in to me. So let's get stuck in and get answering. I love this one. What isn't working in your garden? I really like that because I like being able to be honest with you when things aren't working. But like anything in gardening, it's always a balance. There's always something not doing as well as something else. But at the moment, if I had to pick one thing, it's my daffodils. You know that I have a really nice little spring bulb table in the centre of the guild garden. It's doing brilliantly. But my daffodils that are planted around the pond, under the apple trees and in the grass, they are just not performing. Really, most of them this year are blind, which means that they're not producing flowers, they're just leaves. Part of that can be that they're too tightly clumped together as they start to spread. And certainly a few years ago, I dug a lot of them up, split them, really just to give them that bit more room. They did perform better, but this year has been a bit of a flop. And it's such a shame because I wanted to show loads of colour in my spring garden tour, which is going to be coming up soon. And it doesn't look like it's going to happen. I think at this stage, unless I put some intensive work into feeding them and really caring for them, I'm going to need to get some new bulbs. But that's going to be a job for autumn. But let's think about the next question. Okay, hi Niall, I'm trying to be more sustainable and now use wood pellet cat litter. Do you know if this is safe to put in my compost that's going to be used for veggies if I remove the poo? Sorry, not a very glam question. Okay, not such a glam question, but I picked this for a reason. I think this is a really good point. When you're composting at home, it is brilliant. It means you can use up so many organic materials. Pretty much anything from the garden you can use, but this does show that you do need to be careful. For this, I absolutely would not be using cat or dog poo or anything like that, unless it's something that you've researched and you clearly know that it is safe. Don't go there, particularly in home composting. You may not get sufficient temperatures, you may not compost quite right, and then the danger is you can leave yourself open to disease. So anything to do with cat poo, dog poo, do not go there. Just don't do it. It is a very valid idea and fair play for thinking of it, but I wouldn't do that. Cool. Okay, so next question. Do you draw inspiration from the landscapes and great gardens of Ireland in your own garden? 100% yes, I do. And not just the big gardens that you would expect. So if I was talking about big gardens, I really love a garden which is on the side of Phoenix Park called Farmley. It's managed by the OPW here in Dublin. Or actually, sorry, the OPW is in Ireland. It's fantastic. I go there a lot. I really enjoy huge gardens like Powers Court that has just such stature. In Northern Ireland, my go-to gardens, Mount Stewart and Rowan, are brilliant. There's always something to be seen. But what I would say is that although there's always something to be seen, what I'm taking away from each of these places are small things that I know that I want to introduce into the garden here. In terms of landscapes, that's a really interesting one. Ireland is really varied in its landscape. Because we're a small island, we've got woodlands, we've got mountains, we've got forests, we've got coastlines. So again, I would be drawing little small things from each of those to try and bring into the garden. But the other thing that I really like doing is bringing elements of other people's just personal gardens into my own. Like I have plants that friends have given me, or I have seen, for instance, in someone's garden that I really like, the way they've planted something. and I'll bring it here. So my garden is this mismatched conglomeration of ideas. So yes, I draw inspiration from everywhere, and I would really encourage you to do the same thing. I am loving these questions. I hope you're finding them interesting as well. I'm trying to go with a real mix of things that I found. Next question, slugs and snails, how do you manage them? Right, number one, organically. It's just nowadays, I get that slugs and snails aren't great, but at the same time, stay organic. For me, the way I try and manage them is by managing the way our garden is on the whole. So I encourage birds into the garden by making sure that we have lots of hedges, trees, and mature shrubbery that they're going to like as a habitat. I feed the birds as well to encourage them, but also what I have is a pond, and every garden needs a pond, no matter how small, even if it's like a basin that you just sink into the ground. For instance, we have our pond and it encourages a load of frogs. We have frogs. Frogs eat slugs, and we really don't have a big slug problem. What you can do as well, if you want to, is you can go down a biological control route. Have a look online for nematodes. You basically buy it like a powder and you add it to water. But what they are tiny little parasitic worms that feed on slugs and snails. It is food safe, it's organic, and it's a really good way to go. And I'm thinking about doing that later in the spring if I can get my hands on some of them. So definitely research nematodes. That's a more direct control, but also think about how your garden can have an ecosystem that's going to predate on all of those slugs and snails and keep the numbers nice and low. Okay, so I always say okay before I go to every section. I need to stop doing that. I love this question. How in the world do you find time for your garden as busy as you are? Okay, I am a fan of a list. I'm a fan of a schedule. I'm a fan of a plan. I'll say that. I'm also a fan of being projecty and being busy. So I'm always doing something. So that's kind of how I do it, is I just keep on going. What I would say, though, is just remember that everything you see on social media, not just from me, but from everybody, is one picture of what's happening. I have plenty of areas that are effectively wilderness or are falling apart, and I do not want you to see them. So that's part of it as well, is how do I manage? Some areas just don't get managed, and that's just life. Right. Hi, Niall. I'd love to see some ideas for plants that like deep shade. Great. I picked this question because this is something that I'm working on myself at the minute. I want to plant up the area around the pond and sort of under a couple of the apple trees and moving towards actually this area of the garden. I want to do a nice shade planting. So I've been buying plants recently with that in mind. Now, deep shade obviously is one thing, but I'm planting things that will either cover really dappled shade to deep shade, and I've got them here. So things that you can certainly consider: hostas, which have lovely big lush leaves, and you can get really large ones. Like for instance, this one that's just starting to come up is Hosta Empress Wu. It is humongous, and I'm thinking it's going to look really good in the garden. At the same time, a plant that I've got here, and I've got several of them, this is Brunnera, which is a nice low kind of ground cover plant with hairy leaves, but you can see that they're green and almost pure white. They're really silvery. This is another great one for shade. What else have I got that's going to tolerate shade? If you like a grassy look, something like this is hakonechloa. You can get it in a regular hakonechloa macra, which is just that almost lime green. But at the same time, you can get one which is, I think it's hakonechloa aureola. If it's not, I will leave my correction down below, but it's got gold leaves, really, really nice. If you like dark leaves, something like an actea, this is starting to come up. Actea simplex with dark purple leaves and nice white flowers. That's a great one. And then finally, if you have a big space to cover, because this can be a bit invasive, so health warning, it can be a bit invasive. Something like this. This is acanthus or bear's breeches. It's got big, these are small leaves because this small plant is small. They're going to have big leaves that are almost kind of spiny, but really shiny and mid-green. And then these big spires of flowers that are kind of spiky. They're brilliant. So hopefully this gives you a nice bit of inspiration. If I don't answer your question in this video, don't worry, I'm going to leave you a comment and reply to it, so I will actually answer everybody's questions. Have you stopped growing typical veg like carrots, onions, tomatoes, etc. in favour of a fruit tree guild garden? Right. If you are a long-time subscriber, you're going to well know about this. If you're new to the channel, well, my veg garden behind me is no longer just a veg garden. I'm turning it into a guild garden, a garden full of fruit tree guilds. Each raised bed has a fruit tree. But although that means big change, it doesn't mean that I'm stopping growing the basics. It's just how I'm growing them. Tomatoes, chilies, cucumbers, all of those hot crops, strawberries, I'm going to be growing either here in the greenhouse or down in the polytunnel, and I'm still going to be growing all of my favourite veg. I tend to really like growing things like salads, all kinds of onions, and those kind of basics are still going to be grown. I've got lots of things started, like even here you can see I've got colettes started or kalettes started. All of that is still going to happen. It's just that all of those things, rather than being grown in lines and rows, they're going to be intermixed all the way through like a polyculture, or almost like a raised bed food forest, if that's possible. So that's how it's going to go. So what have we got to talk about next? Are you changing anything around with your existing crops like asparagus? And what other perennial vegetables have caught your eye? So this is another question directly related to the guild garden. And in terms of changing anything around like asparagus, yes, I am. I have 2 asparagus beds that I planted. Well, this is now going to be year 3. So they got planted when I first made the veg garden, and they have not worked very well, mainly because I'm going to be honest. I listened to some advice that I found online. I read something online and then got it completely wrong. It basically said that really good planting combinations for asparagus are strawberries. I then forgot and thought it was raspberries. Do not plant raspberries in amongst asparagus. They are running rampant and they're out competing the asparagus. So actually, in a few weeks, you're going to see what I'm doing, because my plan is I'm going to take the hit. They don't like being lifted. It's such a shame, but I am going to lift them and they're going to be going into different beds. And then the second part of that question was, what other perennial vegetables have caught your eye? Okay, so Welsh onions. I already have Welsh onions that were actually gifted to me, and they're doing brilliantly. So I've got those, I've got Babington leeks, and what I really want to do is get some perennial kale. I tried to grow it from a couple of cuttings last year and it didn't work, so I'm going to have to get my hands on some of that. But definitely, I really want to move to getting lots of perennial veg. Apart from anything from a workload point of view, it's just great. You can't see it, but I've got a cup of tea and it's going cold really quickly. Okay, next question. See, I keep saying okay. I have a small patio garden. What kind of plants, including fruit and veg, could I grow in pots? Great. Actually, loads. But the main thing is, before I say anything else, make sure that you stay on top of the watering and the feeding. Pots dry out really quickly in the summer. They can get frosted in the winter. And also, if they're planted in compost or even soil, ultimately that breaks down, which means as it breaks down, you get smaller air pockets, it gets a bit compacted, and like a battery, it runs out of energy. So that means if you've got something that isn't just like a quick annual crop, if it's something like a fruit tree that you're going to keep going year after year, or fruit bushes, you may need to replace or replenish that compost now and then just to give those plants a boost and give them what they need. But in terms of pots, right, you can absolutely grow fruit trees, but just make sure that you find the right one. It's all about what rootstock they're grafted onto. At the moment, if you go into the garden centres, you'll find brilliant, and they're actually build patio fruit trees. They're on one of the most restrictive dwarfing rootstocks that you can get, and they'll only grow to about maybe 3-4 foot, tiny little things. They look beautiful. There's actually something really nice about a tiny dwarf fruit tree, and they're really manageable. So go with that. Then I would have some containers with nice, quick, easy to grow plants. Things like radishes, salad mixes, some kale that I would harvest as baby leaves, spinach, pak choi is another great one to grow because it's going to grow nice and quick. And in fact, Here is my latest sowing of pak choi. They're doing great. I would have lots of things like that. This, I always call it broccoli raab. It's spelled R-A-A-B, but I believe it's actually pronounced broccoli robe. That's an interesting one to try. Have a think. But really, if you have a decent size container, there's pretty much, in terms of edibles, there aren't many things that you can't grow. So have an experiment and see how you get on. And I think that brings us on to the last question. It does. I loved this. And the person that asked me this has asked, if you only had one day left to live, how would you spend it? I know you're expecting gardening questions, but there's already loads of good ones here, so I thought I'd mix it up. I thought this question was brilliant. Right, so I'm going to answer this in a gardening context, because I think depending on when you'd ask me, I'd give a different answer. In terms of gardening, if I realised I only had one day left to live, that would be easy. I wouldn't touch anything and I would sit and I would enjoy it. Partly because I would know that I wouldn't need to worry about the maintenance. But aside from anything, I said earlier that I'm a kind of busy, projecty person, and that means I never sit still. So, like, I'm sitting here talking to you in the greenhouse, but I'm looking around, and I have got sweet pea on the go. I have got plants that need watered. I've got seedlings that need to be dealt with. I've got other things that need to be pricked out. I'm always busy. And it's actually not always that nice. Quite often, like, I've got this lovely little patio set. I'll come in here and have a cup of tea. How long do you think I actually sit here? Maybe 2 minutes. And then I'm like, oh, that needs done. And I end up walking off trying to get something done. And the tea goes cold. So what I would do is I would just sit and I would take a day to enjoy what I've created, because if you're into gardening, you'll know that gardening is always a process. You're always looking to the future. You're always looking to the future and working for how nice it's going to be. And I think we don't often take an opportunity to actually stop and go, you know what? It might not be perfect, but what I've made is pretty good. And like, if I do that now, if I have a look back, spring's happening here. Things are growing. Things are starting to get going. It's just looking great. So actually, thank you for asking that question, because it's forced me to stop and go, you know what, I'm getting somewhere. This is great. So that's what I would do. I would enjoy my garden. I think that's what I think you should do as well, because take more than 2 minutes, have a look around and just enjoy it. So just a small selection of the questions that you sent in. Thank you so much. I loved getting all of them. It was great. And maybe I'll do these Q&A videos a bit more often. Like I said earlier, if I haven't answered your question here, and I know that I won't have because you were so kind in sending me loads of questions about everything, from things about me to things about the garden to gardening techniques and your problems with gardening and pest and disease problems, I'll answer them all. But for now, I'm going to finish my half mug of cold tea. I'm probably not going to sit here. I'm probably going to go and do a little bit. And until next time, see you later.